Hey listeners, it's your host Dacia. So this episode that features the Dover Quartet was especially fun because it was about a composer that I'd never heard of with a quartet that had just performed the piece the night before. So it was like fresh in their heads. And the recording that you hear in the episode is actually of the performance that they did the night before. So I think you're going to dig it. And by the way, thanks to Chamber Music Houston for bringing the Dover Quartet to town. They bring tons of cool music to Houston. Anyway, that's enough of me. Enjoy the episode. Oh, and by the way, if you do enjoy this episode, make sure to rate, review us, and subscribe to us on iTunes. Every little vote of confidence counts. Thanks. My name is Dacia Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock, and I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical, but I really want to learn. So, every week on this show, a classical music expert will give me a piece of classical music they think I should know, and then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the classical classroom. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Dacia Clay, and here with me today is the Dover Quartet. Chamber Music Houston has brought the Dover Quartet to town, and we're lucky enough to have stolen them for a few minutes. The members studied at the Curtis Institute and at the Rice University's Shepherd School of Music. They were in residence at Rice and then became the first ever quartet in residence at Curtis. The members have soloed with the world's finest orchestras. I'm going to let them go around and introduce themselves, starting with you, Joel.
Hi, I'm Joel, and I play the violin, and I grew up in Atlanta.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Bryan. I play violin, and I grew up in Philadelphia.
Hi, my name's Milena. I play the viola, and I grew up in Florida.
Hi, I'm Camden. I'm the cellist, and I grew up in Seattle.
Oh, nice. I just went to Seattle. Well, welcome to the Classical Classroom, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So what are you going to be teaching me about today?
Well, we're going to be talking about Berg's Opus 3 quartet, which is an early work for him, but a true masterpiece. And it's something that a lot of people have not heard. And it is a little bit outside the realm of maybe what most audiences are comfortable with, in a sense. He was part of what's known today as the Second Viennese School, which was this new school of thought and composition that dissonance was not a bad thing and should not be avoided and actually should be exploited to its fullest. And it resulted in a 12-tone system, which is where composers would try to use all 12 tones before repeating a tone. So in some people's words, they would say that it's atonal, not in the words of the actual composers. And in fact, it's probably a lot more accurate to say that the music is a super romanticism. It's more expressive even than some of the music that came before, in that it uses a lot of the same expressive devices, but the harmony is very, very complex and rich, and it's amazingly emotional to play.
Which is why they liked to call it pantonal, meaning it spans all keys because you're getting the emotional value out of every single key pretty much in any piece.
Interesting. Well, before we get into that, and I'd like to talk more about it, can you tell me a little bit about, is it Berg? Berg? Okay.
Berg.
As a person, like, who was he? Where did he live? When did he live? That kind of thing.
Well, he worked and studied with Arnold Schoenberg, who was the inventor of the 12-tone system.
I should say, by the way, that this is Camden.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Hi. And he studied with him in Vienna, right?
I think so, yeah.
Started studying with him in 1904. This piece was written in 1910, and it was premiered in Vienna also at the Musikverein, a really, really nice venue there. Apparently it was not that well received on first hearing, which is understandable. It's a very complex piece. But
Actually, his story is kind of one of those that shows that kind of being in the right place at the right time can really dictate what happens with your life. And when he was a kid, he responded to this advertisement by one of the most famous and influential composers today, who Camden actually mentioned, Schoenberg, Arnold Schoenberg, who apparently was low on cash and wrote an ad saying he needs students, or he wanted students. And Berg, as a kid, responded to this ad, started studying with Schoenberg, and the relationship developed to a really, really close one. And during the time he was studying with Schoenberg, his Berg's father died, and Schoenberg became somewhat of a surrogate dad to him as well. So they were really, really close, and he was one of his two absolute star pupils. And the fact that Berg was able to develop the kind of relationship with Schoenberg, I think, made a huge impact on who he became in terms of importance in our world today of music.
Yeah. And Schoenberg at that point was already a well-known figure. Okay.
Yes.
And so he kind of like helped introduce him into the world of music as well. Wow, that's really interesting. So can you explain in a little more depth to me what 12-tone is?
It means 12-tone is well, basically the rule of 12-tone music, if you're going to be really strict, is that you need to use all, because there are 12 tones in the chromatic scale, like a regular. We're not counting quarter tones or anything, just like actual notes, like on the piano. There are 12 chromatic notes. And the rule of 12-tone music became you have to have used every single note of all 12 notes before repeating one.
Oh, wow.
Right? Which makes it sound not very grounded, at least for us who are used to tonal music, and very chromatic and therefore dissonant.
Wow, that's crazy. So as a composer, you're sitting down, you're writing music, and tell me why, and forgive me if you already mentioned this, why did this become a thing? Like, why did the person who invented 12-tone music say, yes, all 12 tones should happen before you repeat a tone?
That is such a great question, and some people wish that it hadn't happened. But it's a very logical reason, I think. Looking at what was going on historically, from starting with Beethoven, who was able to stretch the limits of harmony without breaking rules, but making it sound as if the rules were broken. When he started that, people like Brahms then got even more complex with their harmonic structure. Wagner, though, was the one who really enabled the ideas of Schoenberg to make sense, because Wagner was so close to destroying tonality without destroying it. It was always in a key, but it's extremely complex and chromatic to the point where it could sound very many times as though it's not in a key. And so that idea intrigued Schoenberg, and his sextet that Joel just mentioned for Clairtenacht is not pantonal. It's more like Wagner taken a step further, that's even closer to just like polytonality, every key being present. And it's very, very logical then for him to look at that masterpiece that was an early work for him and to say, I know that I'm onto something. I think what I'm onto is that the more chromatic tones I use, the better the music is. And so it wasn't that much of a leap for him to say, I'm going to use this as a system.
Okay.
It's interesting because it's like he felt limited by regular tonality or by the rules of those standard rules of harmony, and he felt as though creating this new 12-tone system would free music up to be even more expressive. But when we think about trying to write 12-tone music, it feels very limiting.
It feels almost formulaic in a lot of ways.
His music actually, especially the piece that we played last night, or the one we're talking about today, sounds a lot more like it could be influenced by Wagner or Mahler than Schoenberg.
So there's the second Viennese school. What was the first Viennese school? And why did there need to be a second one? Bryan, because you've been so quiet, I'm going to make you answer it.
Well, the first Viennese school is basically all the giants of classical music, I think.
Okay. It was not an organized school. It was like somebody looked at this in hindsight and went, oh, these people are kind of in a group together and have a similar way of thinking about things. Okay. And is that the case for the second Viennese school as well? Like people have gone back, sort of looked at history and said, oh, these people can kind of loosely be grouped together? Or did they actually study together?
It was a little bit more specific.
Yeah.
Schoenberg, Berg, and Schoenberg's other big student, Anton Webern, they were kind of like the three kings of the second Viennese school, but the Schoenberg was like
the father.
Yeah, he was
the
like
father of the system.
the beginning of it all. It's kind of almost like a renaissance, like a musical composition renaissance that they were having in their own little world over there.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, I don't think we've mentioned it, but 12-tone...
This is Bryan, by the way.
Yeah, 12-tone music is actually called, they call it serialism.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I've heard that term before. Why the two terms, and what does serialism mean? Is it different from 12-tone? Are they synonyms?
12-tone is a branch of serialism, because serialism is the concept that once you cycle through a certain number of ideas, you repeat them. So 12-tone music is serialistic in terms of the notes used, but later on certain composers became fascinated with serialism in every aspect. So dynamics, for instance, how loud things would be serialized, articulations would be serialized. So depending on how fascinated these composers got with the logic of it, and with recycling things, the serialism would take over every aspect of the composition.
Okay, now that we've established what we're going to be listening to, why don't we go ahead and listen to some examples of it? Where would you guys like to start in this piece?
The opening?
Well, let's think about how the concert went last night.
I mean, we could just start at the beginning and kind of go through it if you'd like to do that. That seems most logical.
That sounds probably good.
Okay.
Yeah. That's actually the motive for the piece. That's a huge motive.
Okay. Which is a repeated pattern.
Well, it's a sextuplet thing kind of going into a big beat. So, like the viola just played it, for example.
Yeah, he uses these motives and changes them throughout, from the beginning of the piece to the end of the piece. The same rhythmic figures, the same note groups come back in different shapes and sizes.
Right here, actually. In the cello, it happens very quickly. It's a faster tempo.
Actually, I feel like this piece doesn't really have any themes per se. It's all motivic, basically.
That rhythm is kind of like a theme, I guess.
What is the difference between a theme and a motive? Like, I kind of understand what a motive is.
I would think a theme would be more melodic.
Yeah.
It's like something you leave and you're humming it. The motives are generally shorter.
Okay.
And
rhythmic.
they'll either be a rhythmic thing or a
note
group
pattern.
of notes. Yeah, a pattern of notes.
Gotcha.
Here you can hear that.
Yeah, these 5 notes.
So you can hear every instrument had it in a row there.
I
So
see.
he's really highlighting that theme, or that motive, as he said. That's right, it's not a theme. But yeah, he ties these things together so effectively. Actually, the first movement is technically in sonata form, which means that he takes these motives and actually has a development where he's presented them and then he alters them systematically and then he brings them back.
I see.
And so it's an amazing feat that he's combining a traditional form, the sonata form.
Here's another really important motive, I think, in the cello coming up here.
Oh, yeah.
The thing that's so important about, or it sounds so mathematical when we talk about motives and structure and all that kind of thing, but that's what actually gives the music its emotional value. And hearing those motives and the way that they change and why they're changing, and hearing the thing we heard at the very beginning, and then at the part where we heard it coming in quick succession, it was so much more intense and passionate, and that kind of thing, like being able to recognize those motives throughout the piece are kind of like what we as audience members, it's kind of like our characters in the story, and it's following their journey, and that keeps us connected to the music.
And was Berg I know that some composers are more specific about how they want for you to play something. And
He's extremely
You should
specific.
see these parts, actually.
We'll
There's
have 2 notes with 6 different markings underneath.
Really?
I think we counted one bar to see who had the most markings in one bar, and it was Milena's part had 9 or 10 markings in one bar.
And that goes by in 4 seconds.
Wow.
It's impossible.
Wow.
I mean, it's really almost impossible to be able to do all the stuff that they're asking. But I think the idea that they're trying to convey is that it's extremely emotional and that it should, be breathing all the time rather than just kind of sustaining through something and it just kind of being, it's
right.
It has so much passion behind it.
Actually, that reminds me of something Camden says when we're coaching people, we coach students, which is it's pretty much impossible. I mean, it would be so difficult to explain to someone how to phrase naturally when they speak. Like, oh, well, when you ask a question, you should maybe pause after this word and then kind of curl your voice upward a little bit at the end there. And, like, that would be so hard. And that's basically what Berg is trying to do. He's trying to make us sound natural in what he's feeling emotionally, but it translates into him writing 3 different articulations over 2 notes and 6 different, dynamic levels underneath.
Yeah. It's overmarked, but to bring a point across, I think that's the important thing, like, to remember.
So he's challenging you to sort of be present throughout the entire piece as a performer. He's
to be in his head or in his heart or something. Yeah.
Also, I should mention too that in that vein, one of the things that's amazing about being in his head, is that the rhythm is never taken for granted. You can't just sort of sit back. Most pieces are in a tempo, so at least once you start, you're kind of, no matter what happens, you're mostly in that, you have that rhythm going. But with him, the rhythm is so fluid, and he's also always trying to control that. And so you have, and it's very natural, but the tempo is almost never stable for more than a bar. It's always getting faster, getting slower, getting faster, exponentially, getting slower linearly. I mean, all these different possibilities, and he's very specific about what he wants. But
I love how when I asked that question, all of you went, oh. So what's going on in the music now?
This is actually when we're getting back to the original material.
Yeah, this rhythm, he introduced it in the very first bar. I think we were talking during it, but now it's much more constant and a little faster.
That's the thing that cello played earlier, and then here's the opening theme. Ta-da. And then back to that original motive that Milena was saying was brought in at the beginning of the piece. Yum, bum, 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 bum.
And this is the kind of thing where on first listen, you might not even notice that it's coming from the same motive. It just sounds like new material because he's morphed it so much.
This is maybe one of the few themes in the piece. It kind of comes back a lot of times.
You can hear the little motives of the scrambling notes in the background.
This is the theme, and then it's passing from viola to second violin, and then to first violin. Cello has it. Viola, second
now
violin.
Now all the little motives.
There's so much going on in this piece at once, but like you really have to listen for it.
Well, that's a particularly climactic spot too, and it's like it keeps, like, he always writes like a cello rondo and then retard, so it's like always moving forward and like gets excited, and then someone else comes in with something, and it's like it retards like while bringing in the next, like, it's the reiteration of the same thing.
I feel like it's almost impossible to really like pinpoint, oh, this is the theme here, or this thing, like, kind of, there's so much stuff going on, you just kind of have to experience it in the moment.
And that's the beauty actually of listening to this kind of music over and over, because you'll never stop discovering things in it.
Yeah.
And if you were to see our parts also, like what you said, it sounds so complicated. We have to play pretty much off the score most of the time so we can see what's going on around us the whole time, because you can't rely on what you're hearing, because pretty much never are we all 4 together at once.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it sounds like while it all sort of syncs up in some way that I can't describe, like it all clearly belongs together, it sounds like you're all in 4 different corners doing your own thing along the same theme or something.
This moment, he's actually in F major for quite a long time now, if you listen closely. See, this writing is very much like Wagner because it's actually truly an F major, but it only barely lines up with complete F major chords because of neighbor tones or dissonances. So he has, in other words, moving lines that only line up in F major for one note, but the ear can still pick up that it's F major, even if it only lines up for 1/16th note, for instance. But you really feel that it's actually in a key.
That is
It's really
completely outside of my understanding, but I love it.
There's just a lot of distractions away from making it feel like you're actually in F major, but most of the parts are there.
Okay.
Actually all the time kind of hidden by distracting notes that kind of blur it for your ear, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's almost like subliminal messaging or something. You know, it's like you might not be able to actually see it, but it's there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the kind of writing that existed before Schoenberg. They actually were already doing that kind of experimentation with almost breaking the key. That's what Wagner did so well.
And then this is the very end, and you can hear that.
Okay, so Joel, you said a word that I didn't quite get. I think it was cellorando?
Oh, the accelerando. Accelerando is just a Italian word that musicians use oftentimes, and it just means to move forward,
Speed up.
Accelerate.
to accelerate, basically.
Okay.
So when I'm saying, accelerando and retard, that means retardando is the same thing. It just means holding back.
Gotcha.
So it's a lot of basically, written push and pull.
We're
of
so
the
used to
music.
saying these words in other languages because most of the composers whose music we play wrote them in those languages.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I asked somebody about that once. I was like, why don't we just say these things in our native languages? And they said, well, it's kind of like science. You know, you say things in Latin because that's universally understood. And I was like, oh, that really makes sense. So what, and I always like asking people this question because it's very wide open, but what is this piece about to you when you listen to it?
Well, it was inspired by he had a relationship with this woman, and I guess he kind of wanted. Oh, right. She
became his wife.
She became his wife later, but her parents did not really approve
they
of them.
find him to be a very promising prospect.
This is a common problem for musicians.
Yeah.
So yeah, her parents didn't approve, and I think it was through that struggle that he found a lot of the inspiration for this piece.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. So obviously he put a lot of passion into it.
Yeah. I see. I could hear what you were talking about, Camden, about how, people think that this sort of music is very mathematical and calculated, and it clearly is, but you can hear the romanticism, like it's very emotionally intense. Should we listen to just a bit of the second half, the second?
We should, yeah.
Sure.
Is there a good spot that you think kind of?
I would say either the beginning or the end.
Yeah, it'd be cool to hear the very end, the very ending, because it stops for the longest. I think for the longest amount of time on a really tonal harmony. It's D minor.
D minor, yeah.
This D minor chord, the second to last note of the piece, and you think that that's the end, and then there's this cluster.
Okay, all right. So this is the end of the piece.
Dripping with romanticism here. Yeah.
See, that was a C sharp major chord for 1 second, very briefly.
And then this is a very long kind of growing section. It's going to culminate at this like huge, climax. You could feel it happening.
He uses this technique where we actually have to play with the wood part of our bow rather than the hair.
What?
And it makes a really strange sound.
Yep.
Here we're everyone but the cello you can do.
Are you playing with the wood?
Yeah.
Wood there? Yeah. I'm just playing a regular note.
The two violins, yeah.
It's hard to pick up on the recording.
Oh, I hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's with the wood part.
So the opening theme, or the motive. And then you can kind of... Everything's getting blurred.
So you see how the second to last chord really makes sense? And then the last one was like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fake out.
It's abrupt.
Yes, very abrupt.
Yeah.
And we don't know if that's something that's left up to our interpretation, I guess, since he's not alive, we can't ask him. But was that last chord like kind of like a slamming of the door? Or is it more of everything being left up in the air, like in a question?
Right. Or did he mean to write more?
Wish you would have. It would have been nice to have another movement. It's so great.
Although it's so draining, it's such intense music to play, actually. It would be hard to go on for much longer.
It seems like you would have to pay such strict attention to, from how he's written the piece to how to play every single note and how to play it together while paying attention to your own part.
It's kind of like reassembling a Swiss watch on stage every night in front of everybody, because all the parts are there, but you're actively putting it together, and it varies probably the most of almost any piece night to night, just because it's so complex that any little change affects everything else in such a huge way. But it's really fun.
With like more melodic music, you're sort of carried along by that melody. With more traditional music, there's more of a traditional like cadence to it, and you're kind of bouncing along. And this, it's just like, it's over here, it's over here, it's over here, it's going fast, it's going slow. Wow. Why did you choose to perform this piece? Because I know you guys are kind of touring around the country.
Well, the Berg is really special for us because it was actually the first piece that we played together as a string quartet, the four of us. And it was part of Curtis's doing, actually, with a project that they had, a second Viennese school project at the school. And they wanted a group to perform this piece. And they asked us, at the time we had just formed, and we were thinking about repertoire to learn, and he was like, this guy, David Ludwig, who's a wonderful composer and on the faculty there now, he was heading the project, and he asked us if we would be interested in learning the piece. And Milena had just worked on it, actually, at New York String Orchestra seminar in New York with some really great people, and she was like, oh, this piece is amazing, like we should totally do it, and we're gonna love it. And as Camden said last night, if you can work through that at the beginning of your, quartet relationship, maybe you have the chance to stick it out. So it's a big piece, but
okay. And why pair it with the Dvorak and the Beethoven?
There is actually, well, the passage that we listened to that was in F major, sort of vaguely disguised F major, is really important in connecting it to the other two works, Dvorak American Quartet, also in F major, and then Beethoven's Quartet Opus 59 number 1, which is also in F major. I think in many ways the three pieces represent what we're about as a group, Beethoven being the most important of all, probably. Then romantic music, like the Dvorak, is something very important to us, and is one of the things that made us fall in love with quartet playing, for sure. And then the Berg, which was the first piece that we played together. And in addition to all that we love all those pieces in those specific ways, they're actually in the same key.
And there are especially between the Dvorak and the Beethoven on this particular program, there are links with the composers using folk music. Beethoven, the last movement of the quartet, is a Russian theme. And Dvorak, this quartet was nicknamed the American Quartet, and he uses themes from Native American songs to Czech folk songs, and even sounds of nature, and those kind of natural links between the keys, between the pieces and the keys.
Wow, that's really cool. I wish I had been able to come out and see you guys perform last night. I didn't. For some reason, I thought it was tonight.
Oh, that would be logical.
By the way, listeners, the music that you were hearing throughout this program was actually from the Dover Quartet's performance last night. And if you want to find out if they're going to be playing in your town, go to doverquartet.com to find out information.
Except for the first 2 bars of the piece, which were the Emerson Quartet.
All right. Well, Camden, Milena, Bryan, and Joel, thanks so much for being on the Classical Classroom.
Thanks for having
Hey, thanks
us.
for having us.
Dover Quartet, everyone. All right, that does it for this episode. For more Classroom, go to houstonpublicmedia.org/classroom. Follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and YouTube. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Don't forget to rate and review us. Email me at dclay@houstonpublicmedia.org. Thanks today to audio producer Todd, one Todd to rule them all, Hulslander, for twiddling knobs. Thanks to program director Sinjin Flynn for talking to the hand. Thanks to editor Mark DeClaudio for his piercing, shifty eyes. Thanks to the Dover Quartet for being here today. Thanks to me for saying words. But most of all, thanks to you for listening. We'll catch you next time.